Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Ready for episode 15. This time, we're tackling a topic that's been shaping human civilization for millennia. Money.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's a lot more fascinating than just, numbers and transactions. You'll see.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. Your stack of sources for this deep dive was pretty impressive. From bartering in ancient Mesopotamia all the way to the wild world of digital currencies, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, and it's not just about the what of money, it's the why, right? Like, what does each stage in the evolution of money tell us about the societies that used it? What were their anxieties? What were their innovations? What were their values?
Okay, so let's rewind way back. Before coins, credit cards, all that,
Yeah.
how did people even exchange goods? Like, was it all just bartering? A chicken for a basket of wheat, that sort of thing?
You're exactly right. Imagine a world where you had to barter for everything you needed. It was like,
Right.
okay, I got these bushels of barley. I need a new plow. How much barley is that plow worth? It sounds fun in a way, but I can see how it would get complicated really quickly.
Oh, yeah. Try lugging around a cartload of grain to the market. So was there anything that made bartering a bit easier?
Well, that's where commodity money comes in. Societies started using things like barley, cowry shells, even tools as a way to standardize value. It was a step up, even if it wasn't always the most practical solution.
Okay, that makes sense. So the need for something more portable, something more divotable, that's what eventually led to the invention of coins.
It was a driving force. And here's where it gets really interesting. Around the 7th century BC, we see coinage emerging independently in Lydia, in India, and in China.
Wait, hold on. They all came up with the idea of coins on their own. That's mind-blowing.
Right. It makes you wonder if there was some global brainstorming session going on back then.
Seriously, like, did they have ancient Zoom meetings or something? I mean, what are the odds?
It suggests maybe there's like a point in a society's development where the complexities of trade demand a more efficient system. Like, it just has to happen.
So coins weren't just a random invention. They were a response to a growing need. And once that need was met, I'm guessing it changed everything.
Absolutely. Standardized coins make transactions easier. They make wealth more portable, economies more efficient.
So we've gone from bartering to coins. What's the next big development in the history of money? Did somebody just wake up one morning and say, hey, what if we just started using paper?
Haha, not quite that simple. But you're on the right track. Paper money was the next big leap, and it might surprise you to learn that it wasn't the Romans or the Greeks who pioneered it. It was the Chinese.
Really? The Chinese?
Yep. During the Tang Dynasty, way ahead of the European Renaissance. Paper money is essentially a promise. It represents value that's not inherently present in the paper itself.
That's a huge leap of faith. Did they just decide to trust the government that much? Like, I don't even trust my roommate with my leftovers?
It was a gradual process, but it revolutionized commerce. It's lighter than coins, easier to transport, and it could represent larger sums of wealth. It paves the way for a lot of the financial instruments we use today.
Checks, credit cards, anything that represents value without actually being, gold or silver.
Exactly. And that brings us to a point where much of our money today exists only as entries in bank databases. It's a world away from those early forms of commodity money we talked about. It's just ones and zeros.
So money has become this abstract concept, almost disconnected from any physical form. And of course, now we've got the whole cryptocurrency craze. Bitcoin's trying to redefine money once again. But how does all that fit into this historical narrative?
Cryptocurrencies are fascinating because they represent a potential return to a decentralized system, one that's not controlled by governments or traditional financial institutions, kind of like a rebellion against centralized power,
Full circle, right.
Yeah.
From bartering, which was inherently decentralized, to centralized systems like coinage and paper money, now back to a decentralized system with digital currencies.
That's a really interesting observation. It really highlights how the history of money is not just a linear progression. It's a dynamic interplay of ideas, innovation, and social shifts.
So it's not just about the technology. It's about the underlying power dynamics and how people choose to organize themselves. That's a pretty deep dive, I'd say.
Exactly. And to understand those power dynamics, we need to look at how specific civilizations throughout history have used and manipulated money.
Okay, I'm ready for some more historical examples. Where should we go next on our chronological journey?
Well, let's start with the Roman Empire. They had a complex and very organized monetary system that played a huge role in their rise to power.
The Roman Empire. Now, that's a civilization that knew a thing or two about power and influence. I'm all ears.
When we talk about the Roman Empire and money, we got to talk about the denarius, their primary silver coin. It became a symbol of their economic and military might.
So it wasn't just about having a standardized currency. It was about projecting an image of power, too.
You got it. The denarius, it wasn't just a means of exchange, it was a tool of empire. Roman legions, they were paid in denarii, helped ensure loyalty and discipline. And as the Roman Empire expanded, well, guess what? So did the circulation of the denarius.
So like a physical representation of Roman dominance. You could use it to buy goods in Britannia, pay taxes in Gaul, or, I don't know, bribe a barbarian chieftain on the fringes of the empire.
Exactly. But this reliance on the denarius, it also had its downsides. What happens when the value of your currency is tied to the fortunes of your empire?
I'm sensing a potential problem here. If Rome starts having a bad century, does the denarius start losing its value?
Bingo. As the Roman Empire faced, well, internal strife, economic instability, military setbacks, the silver content of the denarius, it was gradually reduced.
So they were basically debasing their own currency to try and stay afloat. Happens all the time, right?
It's a tactic that rulers throughout history have used, and it often leads to inflation, economic hardship, loss of trust in the monetary system.
It's a reminder that money is only as good as the faith people have in it, right? Whether it's backed by silver, gold, or the promise of a government.
That's such an important point. Money is fundamentally about trust. Which brings us to another fascinating case, the Islamic Golden Age. We were talking about paper money earlier. What role did Islamic societies play in all of this?
Right. They were early adopters of paper money, if I remember correctly.
Oh, they were more than just adopters. Muslim scholars and merchants, they were innovators in their own right. Developed sophisticated financial instruments, like checks, bills of exchange, even early forms of banking institutions.
Wow. So they were really laying the groundwork for a lot of the financial practices we use today.
They were. These innovations, they were driven by the need to facilitate trade across vast distances, from the Middle East to North Africa and beyond. Imagine a merchant in Baghdad wanting to send payment to a supplier in Cordoba, transporting large amounts of gold or silver. Risky and impractical.
So that's where these new financial instruments come in. Checks, bills of exchange.
Exactly, a check. Basically, a promise to pay a certain amount of money to the bearer. It was a way to transfer value without having to physically move coins or bullion.
Trust again. You have to trust the person writing the check, the institution backing it. It's amazing how these fundamental concepts keep recurring throughout history, isn't it?
They really do. It highlights how money is not just a technology. It's a reflection of social structures, cultural values.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Every time human society reaches a new level of complexity, the way we use and think about money has to evolve as well.
That's a brilliant observation. It's this constant dance between innovation and necessity. And as societies become more interconnected, well, the need for efficient, reliable financial systems becomes even more critical. Speaking of which, let's talk about another fascinating civilization with a unique approach to money, ancient Egypt.
Ancient Egypt, I always think of pyramids, pharaohs, hieroglyphs, not exactly Wall Street.
You might be surprised. While the Egyptians didn't use coins in the same way as, say, the Greeks or Romans, they had this sophisticated system based on weights of precious metals, mainly gold and silver.
So instead of handing over a coin, you'd be carrying around little nuggets of gold.
Not quite nuggets. They used standardized weights, called dabin, used to measure the value of goods and services. It was a system where the value was directly tied to the weight of the metal.
So they were weighing their money instead of counting it. That must have made for some interesting transactions at the marketplace.
It definitely required a bit more precision than just handing over a few coins. And it wasn't just about practicality either, gold in particular. It had religious significance for the Egyptians, associated with the sun god Ra, and using it in economic transactions added a whole other layer of symbolic meaning.
Money wasn't just a means of exchange. It was imbued with spiritual significance. It's another reminder that money is never purely economic. It's always intertwined with culture, religion, belief systems.
Exactly. And this connection between money and culture, it's something we see throughout history, from ancient civilizations to the present day.
Speaking of the present day, I know you've got some fascinating insights into how money has evolved in the modern era. Let's fast forward a few centuries. How does the story unfold?
Absolutely. But before we jump into the modern era, there's one more fascinating chapter we need to explore, the Age of Exploration.
Ah, the Age of Exploration, a time of daring voyages, new discoveries, and new forms of money. I'm intrigued.
As European powers ventured across the globe, they encountered new cultures, new resources, and of course, new ways of thinking about wealth and exchange. This period had a profound impact on the global monetary landscape.
I can only imagine the economic upheaval. New trade routes, new empires, new commodities flooding the markets. Must have been a wild time to be alive.
It was a period of immense transformation, led to the development of new financial instruments, like bills of exchange, allowed merchants to make payments across vast distances without having to transport heavy chests of gold or silver.
Bills of exchange. So kind of like a proto-check.
You could say that. It was a written order from one party to another, instructing them to pay a certain amount of money to a third party at a specific time, way to facilitate international trade, reduce the risk associated with transporting physical currency.
Sounds like the age of exploration was a turning point for money, connecting different parts of the world in a way that hadn't been possible before.
Exactly. It was the dawn of a truly global economy, with money flowing across continents, oceans, but it also brought about new challenges.
What kind of challenges?
As European powers established colonies and trade networks around the world, they sought to control these financial flows, extract wealth from their colonies. Money became even more closely tied to imperial ambitions, global power dynamics.
So it wasn't just about facilitating trade anymore. It was about using money as a tool of control, exploitation.
Unfortunately, that's a part of the story we can't ignore. Money has often been used to perpetuate inequality, reinforce existing power structures.
It's a sobering thought. But it also highlights the importance of understanding the history of money, so we can recognize these patterns and, work towards a more just and equitable financial system.
I couldn't agree more. And that brings us closer to the modern era, where we see the rise of nation-states, the Industrial Revolution, eventually the digital age.
Okay, I'm ready for the next chapter. From galleons laden with silver to the lightning-fast world of digital transactions. How did money continue to evolve?
Okay, so we've gone from bartering to coins to, bills of exchange crisscrossing the globe. What happens to money as we enter the modern era? What changes everything?
Well, the Industrial Revolution, it just throws open the doors to a whole new financial landscape, We see mass production, factories popping up everywhere. This surge in economic activity, it just demands new ways to manage and invest money.
So it's not just about trading goods anymore. It's about investing in the systems that produce those goods. Exactly. The rise of stock markets is a great example. People could buy shares in companies, essentially owning a piece of the means of production, democratized investment in a way. But, also introduced new forms of speculation, risk.
Yeah, the thrill and the potential pitfalls of the stock market. A story as old as time. But it feels like this is really where money becomes, deeply embedded in the fabric of modern society.
It does. And as industrialization spread globally, well, those financial systems, they went with it. Global markets become increasingly interconnected with money flowing across borders faster than ever before.
And then the 20th century hits, and it's not exactly a smooth ride for the global financial system. 2 world wars, economic depressions.
Absolutely devastating events, not just in terms of human life, but also for global economies. Currencies collapsed, hyperinflation was rampant. It just highlighted how fragile financial systems can be, even the most powerful ones.
I know that after World War II, there was this big push to establish international institutions to try and prevent future economic disasters.
Right. You're thinking of the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. Gave birth to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The goal: to create a framework for international financial cooperation, stabilize currencies, promote trade.
That sounds like a monumental task. Did it work?
It was ambitious. It did help stabilize the global financial system in that post-war era, but it wasn't without its critics. Some argue that it gave too much power to certain countries and didn't do enough to address the needs of developing nations.
Sounds like those debates are still going on today. But as the 20th century keeps unfolding, there's another massive shift. The digital revolution.
And with it comes a whole new way of thinking about money. We see credit cards emerge, then online banking. Suddenly, money can move around the world electronically at lightning speed.
It's crazy how quickly things changed. I remember when ATMs seemed like the height of technology, and now we're buying coffee with our phones.
It's mind-boggling, right? But this rapid digitization, it also introduced new vulnerabilities. Cybercrime, the risk of data breaches, it's a whole other can of worms.
Which brings us to what might be the most disruptive chapter in the history of money yet. Cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin and the like, they seem to be rewriting the rules of the game entirely.
They are. Cryptocurrencies challenge the very idea of centralized control over money. They're decentralized, operating on blockchain technology, which is basically a distributed public ledger. Every transaction is recorded, and everyone can see it.
So it's like taking power away from banks, governments, and putting it back into the hands of the people.
That's the idea. Although the reality is a bit more complicated, of course. It's still early days for crypto, but they're definitely forcing us to rethink what money is, how it functions, who gets to control it.
From shells and barley to bits and bytes, it's been an incredible journey through the history of money. What stands out to you as like the biggest takeaway from all of this?
I think what's most fascinating is that money is so much more than just a means of exchange. It's a reflection of us, our ingenuity, our social structures, our fears, our aspirations. It's been a driving force behind wars, empires, technological innovation. It's a powerful force, no doubt about it.
And it's deeply personal, too.
Right.
Money affects our daily lives in countless ways. It shapes how we work, how we spend our leisure time, how we think about the future. It's everywhere.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why it's so important to understand the history of money. It helps us see beyond the surface, understand the complex forces that shape our financial world. For better or for worse, it's a story that's still being written.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about today. From the ancient marketplaces of Mesopotamia to the digital frontiers of cryptocurrency, we've traced the evolution of money through millennia. And it's clear that this story is far from over.
It's true. As technology continues to advance and our world becomes even more interconnected, who knows what the future holds? Maybe we'll see entirely new forms of exchange emerge, ones that we can't even imagine yet.
Now that's a thought to leave our listeners with. What will the next chapter in the history of money look like? That's something for you to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the history of money.